Knowing that you'll respect them in the morning with intelligent talk that stimulates.
Well, welcome back to our Picking Up the Pieces segment. This is Inside the News. Wayman Brunson and Vernuccio, Frank Vernuccio, Ben Brunson. My name is Guy Wayman. Let's go back and pick up the pieces here because something we did not talk about, Iran and nuclear weapons and the nukes. Ben, go.
Nothing's really changed in that the Iranians have one strategic focus, and that's to have a nuclear weapon and the ballistic missile to deliver it with. And their target is the state of Israel and specifically the city of Tel Aviv. It is a very dangerous time. The entire Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu and the military, and frankly, I would say any leader, even a leftist leader, is no different because it's such an existential threat to Israel that there's a complete focus on the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And the Israelis have penetrated that program pretty thoroughly over the last 25 years and done a lot of damage through covert means. But the Iranians continue, and they're very close to a breakout. They have a lot of highly enriched uranium at this point, enriched up to close to 80%, which is just shy of weapons grade enrichment. You need to be about 85 to 90% uranium-235 to have a warhead. If you go watch the movie Oppenheimer, you can get a quick lesson in how that works. So it's a very dangerous time. And the Saudis have stated in the past that if Iran goes nuclear, they will be compelled to develop their own nuclear weapons. So you will have a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. The Saudis have more money than anyone else to devote to it if they want to. So they will get there if they put their minds to it and put their funds behind it. And we'll have a true nuclear arms race in the Middle East.
All right, let's connect the axis of evil here, Frank, because what's going on with North Korea? Because they're starting to flex their muscles as well. We talk about nuclear weapons. They would love to take out the United States.
Yeah, the Hwasong-20 missile, I believe it's called, was tested, shot into the Sea of Japan. One of these days, there's going to be a problem with one of those missiles, and it's actually going to hit Japan. It won't have a warhead attached to it, of course, and that could spark a huge conflict in that part of the world. The one good thing about North Korea's missile and nuclear saber rattling is that it encourages more and more Tokyo to develop its armed forces into a first-class fighting force. With the advent of the F-35 fighter jet, which can take off and land vertically, it turns just about every ship into a mini aircraft carrier. Japan doesn't have any full-fledged US-style aircraft carriers, but it has a lot of helicopter attack ships, which could serve basically the same function. If this keeps up, Japan will develop into a first-class fighting force. They're pretty much on their way there already. So North Korea is basically weakening itself the more it advances its missile test. Now, we've said on the show before, there's one overriding danger that we can't ignore. One nuclear weapon launched over, or detonated rather, over the central part of the United States can produce an EMP result, which would basically throw the United States back into the 1860s. North Korea might be crazy enough to do that. And I think that's the one thing we have to keep looking at. We need to continue to develop the capabilities of our anti-missile defenses. This is something Ronald Reagan started back in the 1980s. It was poo-pooed by much of the media. It was called Star Wars. It was called a whole variety of different pejorative names. We cannot ignore that a North Korea or Iran or some other crazy terrorist group will at some point get a missile, get a nuclear weapon to put on top of it, and decide to take out the United States. It's a real possibility that we can't ignore.
All right, we have a minute left here, Ben. What do you know about what they're talking about with the Pentagon and these China hacks going into the internet and everything to totally disrupt our military?
Well, the Chinese have a very large and sophisticated cyber war capability, just like the United States. I would say the two countries are the leaders in those capabilities. We have extensive cyber war capabilities, and a big part of that involves pre-positioning, if you will, software code malware into the networks of target countries, target networks, whether it's infrastructure, such as software that controls the grid or water supplies, or it's military targets. You're trying to do that. And it can also impact hardware, such as chips. You can hard code backdoors into silicon chips that are aside from the firmware that drives the chips themselves. So this is a very sophisticated area, and the Chinese are spending a lot of resources. It will be the first front, if we ever go to war with China, will be on the cyber world. The second front will be in space, and the third front will be on the ground across the Pacific, or on the seas across the Pacific.
All right, we have to take our final time out. We'll be back on the other side with more of Wayman Brunson and Vernuccio Inside the News.
Here's Guy Wayman, Ben Brunson, and Frank Vernuccio Inside the News.
Welcome back to Inside the News. This is our final segment of the morning. Frank Vernuccio. He's with the American Analysis of News and Media. You can find him at usagovpolicy.com. Ben Brunson, the author of The Falstaff Enigma and Esther Sling. You can find him at benbrunson.com, amazon.com. A big shout out to all of our affiliates on down the line. Okay, Frank, the Fed came out and they raised it another 25 basis points. And you know what? Bidenomics, they're flexing their muscles and say, hey, look at us. We're doing a great job. Frank?
Well, let's actually look at them. Thanks to Bidenomics, we're looking at an 11.4% increase in food prices in 2022. Household debt rose 0.9%. Gas is unaffordable. When you're bragging about a policy, whether it be economic or anything else, you should at least have something to brag about. And in fact, the end result of Bidenomics has been a disaster for the American consumer. Now, we occasionally hear these things where, well, there's been a slight dip in the rate of inflation. Yeah, on prices that are already so high that many families can't afford them. They have to choose between heating their homes or buying groceries. Congratulations, Bidenomics. You did a great job there. The concept of central planning that we're seeing, which is really what Washington is doing through a combination of excuses like climate change policy and things of that sort. That's the economic policy that brought down the Soviet Union. And as we'll talk about later, I guess my one more thing, is bringing down the Chinese economy as well. This is what Biden is bringing to the United States, what Bidenomics is all about. It's a disaster. And the fact that the president keeps crowing about how wonderful Bidenomics is means that he hasn't looked at a statistic in God knows how long.
Okay, Ben, Bidenomics and the Fed, they just raised it up 25 basis points. Go.
And they made it pretty clear they're going to raise again. So there's another raise coming. Look, the rate of inflation is coming down, but that doesn't mean prices come down. That just means the rate of increase is slowing. For the average American, real wages have fallen under Joe Biden after a significant increase in real inflation-adjusted wages under the 4 years of Donald Trump. For a lot of Americans who live in blue states where taxes keep going up, there's no tax relief whatsoever in those blue states. And states like California and New York are pondering new ways to tax people, same with Illinois. So the taxes never stop going up while real wages have been coming down. So for a lot of Americans, personally, they're in a recession. A lot of the GDP growth, the limited growth we've had, which was a little over 2% in the latest quarter, has come from the government. The government is the leading sector. So we're growing government in this country, which is horrible and chokes out long-term growth. But that's being reflected in the GDP numbers. On the private sector, we aren't seeing much growth at all. In fact, you could argue we're in a recession in the private sector. So there's nothing good about Biden economics. It's disastrous policy from A to Z.
Okay, Frank, your hot button topic.
China has peaked in terms of its economic growth, and that's a real danger for the rest of the world. Traditionally, when dictators are facing domestic crises, they look for a foreign enemy to blame, and sometimes they take action against that foreign enemy. We're looking at a China where there's no real growth, where the rate of young people suicide is soaring, where failed family planning policies have led to a surplus of young men and a deep shortage of young women. The Chinese people are not happy. They're not doing well economically. They're not doing well socially. Certainly, whatever little freedom they had is being taken away. Look for President Xi, dictator Xi, perhaps, who would better call him, to take it out on the United States and blame us and perhaps take action against us in response to his own domestic issues.
Okay, Ben, your hot button topic.
I'm going to look to history for lessons, since we're trying to learn lessons from the war in Ukraine. In early 1932, a war game was held to see how well Pearl Harbor and Honolulu could defend itself from conventional invasion. And a U.S. naval task force was sent to attack Pearl Harbor. The commander, Admiral Yarnell, left the battleships behind and took 2 aircraft carriers, the Lexington and the Saratoga, and arrived 40 miles off Oahu a half an hour before sunrise on Sunday, February 7th, 1932. Launched 152 planes against Pearl Harbor, and that arrived over Pearl Harbor just as the sun broke. The judges concluded by saying that that attack would have destroyed all the airplanes on the ground and the airfields around Pearl Harbor and sunk a number of capital ships. We learned nothing from that exercise in 32 because almost 10 years later to the day, the Japanese did it in real life. So learning lessons is very important. You have to take them to heed.
All right. Wow. Good show today. Thanks, Frank.
Great being with you. Thanks to our audience.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you to our listeners.
And especially thank you to our listeners for tuning in and our affiliates. That's going to do it for this week of Wayman, Brunson, and Venuccio Inside the News. Join us again next week when we once again go inside the news.
You're listening to Wayman, Brunson, and Venuccio Inside the News.